This week I'm doing a Q&A video where I answer some of the general filmmaking questions that you guys have been asking. Hello, my name is Cade and this is DSLRguide. So this is the first ever Q&A video that I've done, and the idea is that I can answer some of your questions directly, but also just kind of round up some of the general questions that people have had that I haven't had the chance to talk about in a specific video. So the first question is, what are your favourite films? Now, there's no way that I can decide and say that these are my absolute favourite films, but these are some ones that came to mind quickly. Now, there's The Sixth Sense, Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Shaun of the Dead, A Beautiful Mind, Catch Me If You Can, and A Few Good Men. So the next question is one I get all the time, and that is, how do you afford all of that equipment? Now, I've been building up my gear very slowly for the last 3 years, and it started out saving up for my T3i and my editing software, Final Cut Pro. And it took me about a year to save up for this, and I was doing 2 paper rounds. Then, as I got more experienced, I started to do some freelance jobs, making promotional videos for small businesses, and then eventually I managed to be earning enough from that I could quit my paper round. And then very recently I've actually been earning a bit of money from this channel, which is very nice since I do spend so much time making these videos. Now, the next question is, are you planning on going to film school? Now, this is a really tough question because every single person is different and the way that we experience things is very different. So I don't think that I will be going to film school, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't go to film school if you're considering it. I believe that you can learn everything you need to know about filmmaking from either learning on the internet or, more importantly, getting experience out there in the real world. And for that reason, I'd rather focus my time on building up my demo reel, making new contacts, and trying to get as much experience as possible outside of school. But I do think that there are lots of reasons why you should go to film school. So there's a great article which weighs up the pros and cons of film school versus no film school, and I'll link to that on the blog post, link in the description. Now, the next question is, what is your favourite part of filmmaking? Now, I have to say that I pretty much enjoy every single stage of filmmaking, but if there was one I had to pick, right now it'd probably be cinematography. Are you in school, and how do you have enough time to make all of these videos? Well, I'm doing my A-levels at the moment, which, for those of you who don't know, is the 2 years before university for students aged 16 to 19, I think, and it is a pretty intense lifestyle, I have to say, trying to balance between filmmaking, school, and DSLRguide, this channel. So I really don't have that much free time. I often spend my lunch breaks at school doing homework so that I can have as much time at home to work on these episodes and other films that I'm working on. But I have to say that I have no regrets about this lifestyle. I do think that, in a way, it's kind of necessary almost if you want to be a successful filmmaker. It's definitely going to take some time and some dedication, but the other thing is that I do enjoy it. So if every single stage, it can be tough at times, but I do enjoy it, and that is just the main thing. How do you encourage yourself to make more short films? Well, I'll be the first to say that filmmaking is definitely tough. Even the shortest of films, especially like narrative stuff, will take a huge amount of time from preparation, shooting, and then a whole lot more time in editing. And I think the key is to find something that you enjoy doing. It's always the same, that if you're working on a genre and a film that matters to you, if the film has a message that you believe in, and that way you will feel very happy to spend a lot of time. It doesn't feel like nearly as much of a chore. So my advice would be to start small. A few years ago I tried to make a really ambitious short film with lots of actors, lots of locations, and lots of days shooting, and we only had a very short amount of time to finish it. So by the time we'd had to go back to school after the summer break, I still hadn't finished it, so the project had to end. But I did learn so much from that experience, one of the main things being that a film doesn't have to be complicated in the sense of having lots of actors, a lot of locations. Sometimes those logistical things just get in the way, and I'd like to be ambitious with my story and my creativity rather than being ambitious with the number of locations and number of actors. So I think just start small, make a really short film with not many scenes, and then that way you can focus on what's important, because the defining features of a good film aren't how much time you spent working on it and how many people were involved. So find films that you enjoy making and that you care about the story, and always remember that every single film is an extremely valuable learning experience. Where do you learn about filmmaking? Now, I have to say that the most important lessons that I've learned from filmmaking have definitely been through practice, trial and error, learning from your mistakes, and looking back at old projects. So this is just from getting out there and having real world experience, because nothing beats that. Every time I do a project, I learn tons of stuff. But the other way, of course, is YouTube. I've learned tons of stuff from a whole range of different YouTube channels. So on the blog post, I embed one video from each of my favorite filmmaking channels. So I highly recommend you check that out if you want to learn some stuff. So the next question is, what mic would you recommend for filming? Now, I picked this question because it's something I get quite a lot, and if you ever want to know which microphone, lenses, cameras, accessories, anything to do with filmmaking that I recommend, then if you just go to dslrguide.tv/mygear, then there's a whole catalogue of all the equipment that I use and that I really strongly recommend, so you can just pick something from there that fits your budget. Do you still recommend Cinestyle? Well, I have to say that I've never really used anything else. I have heard the debate that a super flat profile might not be the best thing for 8-bit footage, but I have to say that Cinestyle is way better than the built-in profiles that come on my camera. They're far too over-sharpened. But I definitely think that profiles like Vision Tech could be worthwhile. I think I'll give them a try and I'll get back to you on that. How much should you charge for freelance filmmaking? Now, I've made 2 videos about freelance filmmaking already, which I'll link to on the blog post, where I kind of skimmed over this a little bit, but now let's just go into a little bit more in depth. So rule number 1 is to make sure that you do plenty of work for free before expecting someone to pay you for it. Then you just look at how much other people are charging. So from Google, I learned that a well-produced wedding video usually starts at £2,000. So let's say that for the wedding they had 2 shooters working for 10 hours. So that's £100 per hour for each person. So as a beginner, you'd work at, I don't know, a quarter of that. And then as you get more experience, you gradually increase the price. Then as new projects come your way, you give them a quote based on a slightly higher hourly rate than your last project, with an estimate of how many hours the new one will take. So other than that, let's say that you're filming a wedding and the client says that they can't afford your quote. Well, in that case, there are a few things you can offer to negotiate. So one of the things is you can be on the shoot for less time. Maybe you just get the main service rather than the whole day. The other thing you can do is you can extend the deadline of the delivery, which means that you have a lot more time to edit it if you need to, and you can be a lot more leisurely. In the same way, if you want to do a deluxe package where you up the price a little bit, then you can offer things like having a second shooter, spending more time filming, and doing multiple edits, like a highlights video and then some kind of longer ones. And then you could also offer something like having them all edited within a month. What storage setup do you recommend? Well, if you're like me where you don't shoot 4K RAW with gigantic file sizes, then something like a 4TB main drive is a good place to start. So if you're using a Mac, then you might want to get an external drive because that's often cheaper, but just make sure it's at least USB 3 or Thunderbolt so that it's quick enough for editing. 7200 RPM drives also help with speed if you can afford them. Now, the next essential is to have another drive, usually 4TB or maybe a bit larger, which is your backup drive. Now, I use a really cheap one that's just USB 2, and the idea is that they're an exact copy of the other one and it updates regularly. So when one of the drives fail, instead of me losing everything, I'll be able to just use the other one, whether it's the backup or the main one, to then copy back to a new drive, a replacement, and then that way you never lose anything. But there will be someone out there saying that I need backups of my backups, something off location in case there's a fire and I lose both of the drives. Now, I think this all just depends on your budget. If you're doing something really important, a really important job, or maybe you're making loads of money off your films, then obviously that would be a worthwhile investment. On the other hand, I think if you're just a regular filmmaker who's just kind of starting out, you should always have at least one backup. That's kind of the minimum, because hard drive failure really is quite common and you do not want to lose everything you've ever done. Do you use Magic Lantern? Yes, I do. I have to say it's got some really good features. I don't use the Magic Lantern RAW, which is kind of what is most famous about Magic Lantern, but I do use it for the widescreen overlays so that I can see exactly what the image will look like when I add those kind of widescreen bars. I also use the focus peaking, the zebras, and the awesome feature that automatically switches the picture style when you hit record. So that way I can use a profile that looks more similar to my grading when I'm setting up my lights, and then as soon as I hit record, it will change to your favorite flat picture style. And the last question is, do you think you'd ever stop DSLRguide if you started doing professional films? Well, the first thing is that DSLRguide is here to stay. I think that if I ever start doing really big production films, that I would just kind of carry on, because I'm sure there's lots to learn from working on a bigger production. And I'd like to think that no matter where my career goes, I'll always be finding a way to share some of the ideas about filmmaking with you guys. So obviously I can't guarantee that DSLR Guide will go on forever and ever, but I do think that it will just continue to adapt, as it already has quite a lot in its first 2 years. But of course the main focus will always be trying to make the best content in terms of what I think filmmakers would like to learn and like to watch. So that's it for this week. If you check out the blog post, then you'll see all the stuff that I mentioned of the extra resources. But that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.